Anna hadn't expected to spend her fall alone in her best friend's house. But when Claire asked her to stay while she traveled through Europe, Anna agreed without hesitation. After all, her life in Chicago had hit a pause. Her relationship of 6 years had ended 3 months ago. And though there were no loud fights or betrayals, the silence between her and her ex had been the loudest goodbye. She needed space. She needed stillness. Claire's house in upstate New York, tucked between the trees and far from her old apartment, was the perfect escape. The house was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts, and for Anna, that was both a blessing and a curse. She tied her hair into a loose bun and wiped down the kitchen counters for the second time, more out of habit than need. The lemon-scented cleaner filled the air, mixing with the soft sound of leaves brushing the windows. Outside, the trees were turning golden. The October sun poured through the windows, lighting the wooden floor in soft amber. It should have felt peaceful, but Anna's chest carried a weight, the ache of a heart not quite healed. The loneliness that comes after too many silent dinners. Too many what-ifs. She reached for the broom and moved into the living room, humming quietly to herself. The radio played something old and soft in the background. The room was warm, familiar. She'd visited Claire so many times over the years, especially during holidays, but being here alone was different. Everything reminded her of something, or someone. Suddenly, the front door opened. Anna paused mid-sweep. Her heart gave a small jolt. Claire wasn't due back for another 2 weeks. No one else was supposed to be here. "Hello," she called out, carefully peeking toward the entryway. A moment later, footsteps echoed through the hall, steady, confident, unmistakably familiar. And then he appeared. "Hey," Matthew said, standing in the doorway with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Anna blinked, almost unsure if she was imagining him. "Matthew," he smiled. "Didn't expect you here. Mom told me she'd be gone, but she didn't mention you were house-sitting." "I could say the same," Anna said, surprised at how different he looked. Taller, a little broader, with that calm presence he always carried. But something else had changed, too. He looked older, more grounded. The boy she remembered was gone. The man standing in front of her was someone entirely new. "I just got back from Vermont. Figured I'd stay a few days before heading to Boston for a job interview," he said, walking in slowly. "Guess I should have checked in first." She laughed lightly. "No harm done. There's plenty of room." He dropped his bag by the stairs and looked around. "Smells clean, like citrus and memories." Anna raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Matthew grinned. It is. You always did bring life into a room." That comment caught her off guard. She looked away, pretending to adjust a frame on the shelf. "I didn't expect to run into you," she admitted, still facing the wall. Matthew stepped closer, his voice lower. "I used to hope I would, honestly, but I never thought it'd be like this." Anna turned to look at him, brows slightly raised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, trying to play it cool, but his eyes gave him away. There was something behind them, something unspoken. "I always noticed you," he said, "even when I was younger. You were different than the other adults. You listened. You laughed like you meant it. You had this light about you." Anna didn't know what to say. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Calm, honest, no pressure, no game. Just truth. "I was older," she said gently, trying to keep things light. "You still are," he said with a soft chuckle. "But sometimes age doesn't matter as much as timing." She looked at him then, really looked. The soft curve of his smile, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet way he stood like he wasn't afraid of silence. There was no denying it. Something in the room had shifted. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "you hungry? There's some soup on the stove." "Only if you're joining me," he replied. They sat at the kitchen table that evening, sharing soup and old stories. Anna told him about her writing projects, the ones she never finished. He told her about Vermont, about missing home, about wanting to do more than just chase titles and paychecks. Conversation flowed easily, like old friends picking up a thread that had always been there by the time he left to go upstairs. It was dark outside. Anna stood in the kitchen alone, her fingers brushing the edge of her mug. She hadn't laughed like that in months. She hadn't felt seen in even longer. And yet, she reminded herself, this was Claire's son. He was 10 years younger. A friend's child, a boundary not to be crossed. But as she turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to her room, her mind kept returning to his words. I used to hope I'd run into you again, and for the first time in a long while. The thought of what might come next didn't scare her. It stirred something else. Hope. The next morning, Anna woke earlier than usual. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. She could hear light footsteps upstairs. Matthew was awake too. She moved through the kitchen, brewing coffee like always, but her hands felt clumsy, distracted. She kept thinking about what he'd said the day before. I used to hope I'd run into you again. It had been unexpected. Honest? Too honest? Maybe by the time Matthew came downstairs, she was already at the table, sipping from her mug. He greeted her with a soft smile, carrying the same calm energy from the night before. "Morning," he said. "Grabbing a cup." "Morning," she replied, her voice quiet but not cold. They sat together, both sipping coffee, watching the trees sway through the window. It was strange how easy it felt, like they'd done this 100 times before. Yet under that ease, something new was quietly building. Over the next few days, Matthew stayed around the house. He didn't say much about where else he could be, and Anna didn't ask. He helped with small things, bringing in firewood, fixing the loose cabinet door, changing a bulb in the hallway. And every evening they'd end up at the kitchen table or on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Anna learned more about him than she ever expected. He wasn't just Claire's son anymore. He was his own person, thoughtful, quiet, smart in a way that didn't show off. He talked about grad school, his love for creative writing, and how lost he felt trying to figure out what came next. He said he didn't want a job that just paid the bills. He wanted purpose, and he really listened. When Anna talked about her breakup, her failed writing dreams, the way she sometimes felt invisible in rooms full of people, he didn't try to fix it. He just sat there, hearing her. It was something she didn't realize she'd missed until then, one afternoon. They sat in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. Anna was curled up with a book when Matthew spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, voice low. She nodded. "Sure. Do you ever regret it? The choices you made?" She looked up slowly. "All the time. But I try not to stay there too long. Regret's a heavy thing to carry." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "I think I've been afraid of choosing wrong. So I keep putting things off. Careers, places, even people." Anna tilted her head. "What people?" He gave a half smile. "You know." She didn't answer right away. She could feel her heartbeat rising. Not from fear, but from the realization that this wasn't just harmless talking anymore. Something was shifting between them, and both of them knew it. "Matthew," she said carefully, "we have a history. But not the kind that leads to this." "I know," he said softly. "But maybe that's why it matters." That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how this happened so fast. Was it just loneliness? The comfort of a familiar face during a vulnerable time? Or had this been quietly building all along, unnoticed until now? She remembered the little moments, him watching her with quiet attention. Remembering things she'd said years ago, how he always made space for her words. Maybe she'd ignored it back then because it felt impossible. But now, sitting across from him each day, laughing at shared memories, trusting him with thoughts she hadn't spoken in years, it didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt real the next day, while sorting through old books in Claire's study. Anna found an old letter she never sent, something she wrote to her ex right after the breakup. It was folded between the pages of a notebook. She sat down, reading her own words. They were raw, honest, filled with the kind of pain that came from loving someone who slowly stopped seeing you. She was still holding the letter when Matthew walked in. "What's that?" he asked gently. Anna hesitated. Then, without thinking too much, she handed it to him. He read it silently. The room felt still. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not pity, not discomfort, but something deeper. He looked at her like he truly saw her. All of her. "I wish I'd known you felt this way," he said quietly. "I wish I could have told you, back then, that you deserved more than that." She looked down. It was a long time ago. "But the way you write," he said, folding the paper gently, "you feel things deeply. That's rare." They sat in silence for a while. No music, no distractions. Just the sound of rain and hearts beating a little louder than usual. Then Matthew spoke again. "I don't know what happens after this week. I don't know if I'll be back in Vermont or in some office in Boston. But I know one thing." Anna turned to face him. "I'd regret not saying this. I want to know you. Not as Mom's friend. Not from a distance. I want to know you. The way you laugh, the way you think, the way you hide your heart in quiet places." Her eyes welled up. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't prepared for someone to look at her like she was worth chasing. She stood slowly, walked to the window, and wrapped her arms around herself. "Matthew, this isn't simple." "I know," he said behind her, "but maybe it's still worth it." She didn't turn around. She just stood there, looking at the rain, because something inside her was breaking open, not in pain, but in hope. Quiet, patient hope. He didn't push. He didn't ask her to decide. He just said, "I'll be here, however you need me to be." And with that, he left the room, leaving behind a stillness filled with more emotion than noise could ever carry. Anna stood there long after he left, heartful, unsure of what came next, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. The days passed quickly, and the atmosphere in the house changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was warm, alive, filled with something unspoken. Anna and Matthew fell into a rhythm that felt natural. Morning coffee became their shared ritual. He'd help in the garden, or read on the porch while she cleaned, or wrote in her journal. They didn't talk about the moment they shared in the study, the letter, the rain, the quiet confession, but it lingered between them, soft and steady like background music. Matthew never pushed. He didn't pressure her for answers or talk about feelings unless she did first. And maybe that's why Anna found herself opening up. They'd sit on the back steps in the late afternoon sun, talking about everything: childhood, dreams, mistakes, fears, the feeling of being stuck between who you used to be and who you're becoming. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in soft pink and gold, Matthew handed her a worn notebook. "It's not finished," he said. "Just some poems and journal entries. Stuff I've never shown anyone." Anna flipped through the pages slowly, reading lines that felt raw, honest, and filled with quiet longing. His words were beautiful and real. She looked up at him, touched. "You write like someone twice your age," she said. He smiled. "I feel older than I am most days." That made her laugh, but it also made her heart ache a little. She knew that feeling too well. Later that night, Anna sat in the living room, reading his notebook again while Matthew was upstairs. She hadn't told him yet, but she was working on something too, something she hadn't done in years. A story? Fiction, maybe? But it felt more like pieces of her life rearranged into something safer. His presence had unlocked something in her she thought was gone. The desire to create, to feel, to be seen. As she set his notebook aside, she pulled out her own journal. There was a folded letter inside, not the one Matthew had read, but another one. This one was never addressed. She had written it during her loneliest days after the breakup, pouring everything she couldn't say aloud onto paper. Something made her get up and walk to the stairs. She found him in the hallway, leaning against the wall, headphones around his neck. "Can I show you something?" she asked. He nodded, following her down to the living room. She handed him the letter and sat quietly as he read it. The letter spoke of emptiness, of being with someone who never really saw her, of staying quiet just to keep the peace, of slowly disappearing into the background of her own life. It wasn't bitter. Just honest. When he finished, he looked at her with eyes full of emotion. "You're not invisible," he said. "Not now. Not with me." His words hit something deep. Not because they were romantic, but because they were kind. She didn't realize how much she needed kindness until it was right in front of her. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, wind rustled the trees. Inside, the space between them grew smaller, not physically, but emotionally. "You make me want to try again," she said quietly. "Too, right? To live. To feel something good without waiting for it to break." He nodded. "You already are." That night, they didn't touch, didn't kiss, didn't cross any lines. But something passed between them, a trust. It's a connection that neither of them could deny. The next day, they drove into town together. It was a simple trip. Coffee, a walk by the lake, a stop at a used bookstore. But it felt like more. Like they were testing what life might feel like outside the walls of Claire's house at the bookstore. Matthew picked up an old copy of The Bell Jar and handed it to her. "You mentioned this once, years ago," he said. "Said it changed how you saw yourself." She stared at him, stunned. "You remembered that?" He shrugged, smiling. "I remember a lot about you." And just like that, her heart did something she hadn't felt in a long time, it hoped. When they got back to the house, a strange quiet fell between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken thoughts. Matthew sat on the porch steps, staring out at the trees. "I'm leaving in 4 days," he said suddenly. "Back to Vermont for now. Then maybe Boston, if the job works out." Anna stood beside him, her arms crossed against the chill. "I know. I don't want this to be a pause in your life," he said. "I don't want to be the thing you forget when things go back to normal." She looked at him, heart full. "You're not a pause, Matthew. You're the first person who made me feel like I wasn't just passing time." He looked up at her. "So, what happens now?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she sat down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder, and said, "Maybe we stop worrying about what comes next. Maybe we just stay here, in this moment, for as long as we can." And so they did. No promises. No plans. Just presence. That night she wrote again. Not letters this time, a story. One about second chances and unexpected timing. About two people who met in the quiet space between heartbreak and healing, and saw something in each other they'd forgotten existed. And as she wrote, Matthew sat across the room reading a book, glancing up at her every so often with a soft look in his eyes. Not pressure. Not possession. Just quiet admiration. Anna didn't know what would happen when he left, or if this feeling would last. But she knew one thing for sure. She didn't feel invisible anymore. And sometimes that's where love begins. The last few days Matthew spent at Claire's house felt like a fragile dream. Beautiful, but with a ticking clock. The leaves outside had deepened into rich reds and browns, and the crisp autumn air reminded Anna that change was coming fast. Neither of them wanted to speak about it much, but the unspoken truth hovered around every conversation. Every glance. On the morning of Matthew's last full day, Anna woke early and found him sitting by the window with a cup of tea. He looked peaceful, but she knew there was a storm beneath that calm. She joined him, sitting quietly until he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About staying in the moment, but also about what happens after." Anna turned to him, her heart tight. "It's okay. We don't have to have all the answers." He smiled faintly. "No, I want to talk about it. Because I'm scared. Scared this will all just disappear when I leave. Like it never really happened." She reached out, touching his hand lightly. "It's real, Matthew. It doesn't have to end just because you're not here." He looked at her hand on his and sighed. "I don't want to lose this. You, not again." Her chest tightened. She knew what he meant. She had spent years losing pieces of herself in silence and separation. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for what this might mean. A chance at something new. Something fragile. Something real. Later that day, they went for a long walk through the woods near the house. The sky was overcast, and a soft wind stirred the fallen leaves beneath their feet. Neither said much at first. The silence felt heavy but honest, to people trying to find the right words without hurting each other. Matthew stopped by a small clearing, looking up at the gray sky. "I don't want to leave things like this," he said quietly. "Between us." Anna took a deep breath. "Me neither." He turned to her, searching her face. "I know this might sound crazy, but I want to try. To be more than what we've been, even if it's hard. Even if the timing isn't perfect." She blinked, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "Because I see you, Anna. Not just your past or your pain, but the person you are right now. And I want to be part of your life. If you'll let me." Her heart raced. She thought of all the reasons not to. The years between them, the complications, the fear of getting hurt again. But something deeper stirred inside her. A quiet hope, a willingness to risk. She nodded slowly. "I want that too." That evening, they cooked dinner together, laughter filling the kitchen as they moved around each other with ease. The tension that had been there all week softened, replaced by something warm and light. After dinner, they sat by the fire, sipping tea and sharing dreams for the first time in a long time. Matthew spoke about his hopes for the future, maybe graduate school, maybe a writing career, maybe staying closer to home for a while. Anna shared her own dreams, finishing her novel, starting fresh, learning to love again. They realized their paths didn't have to be perfect to walk side by side. The next morning, Claire called. She was coming home earlier than expected. Anna felt a knot in her stomach. She wasn't sure what Claire would think about Matthew and her growing closeness. But before she could worry too much, Matthew took her hand. "Whatever happens," he said, "we face it together." When Claire arrived, the house was filled with familiar energy again. But something was different. Anna noticed the way Claire looked at her son, proud but also curious. She sensed the unspoken questions hovering beneath the surface. One afternoon, Claire found Anna and Matthew in the garden, talking quietly. She smiled warmly and said, "You two look like you've been plotting something." Anna laughed, the sound light and free. "Just enjoying the last days before you're back." Claire's eyes softened. "I'm glad you're here, Anna, for both of us." Anna realized then how much this place this time had changed her. She wasn't the same person who arrived weeks ago, broken and unsure. She was stronger, braver, open to love again. On Matthew's last night, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets. "Watching stars peek through the dark sky, I'm going to miss this," Anna said softly. "Me too," Matthew replied. "But it's not really goodbye. It's a new beginning." They leaned into each other, not rushing, just feeling the quiet connection that had grown between them. Before he left the next morning, Matthew handed Anna a small envelope. "Open it when you're ready," he said. Anna watched him walk away, heart full of both hope and fear. Later that day, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, not just words, but promises. Promises to stay honest, to keep trying, to believe in what they had found. Tears blurred her vision as she read, feeling for the first time in years that love wasn't something to fear, but to embrace. She folded the letter carefully, knowing that whatever the future held, this moment, this choice had changed everything. Because sometimes love arrives quietly, not with fireworks or drama, but with a simple truth. Two hearts willing to try again, and that was enough. The wind outside rattled the windows of the old farmhouse, carrying the chill of late October. Emma lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the shadows on her ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet. She could hear the soft hum of the fridge downstairs and the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Everything felt still. But her thoughts wouldn't let her rest. It had been almost 2 years since her mom married David, and they'd moved into his place in rural Vermont. At first, it had felt like starting over. A new family, new surroundings, and a new person sharing the house, Liam, David's son. He was the same age as Emma, just a few months older. And they had met for the first time at the wedding. They didn't speak much at first. Just polite hellos and short conversations in the kitchen. But over time, something shifted. It wasn't obvious. It happened in quiet moments, staying up late, talking in the living room, walking to town together, or watching old movies when everyone else had gone to sleep. They weren't raised as siblings. They hadn't grown up in the same space. Yet somehow, the word stepbrother still built a wall neither of them knew how to cross. Emma turned in bed and stared at the door, her heart feeling heavier than usual. She hated how her chest tightened when she thought about Liam. It wasn't just a passing crush, not anymore. She felt drawn to him in a way she didn't know how to explain, even to herself. And worse, she had no idea if he felt the same. The hallway creaked. She sat up slowly, heart skipping. The sound came again, soft footsteps. Then her bedroom door opened just a crack. Liam stepped inside, wearing an old sweatshirt and pajama pants. His hair was a mess, like he hadn't slept either. He stood there, quiet, the faint light from the hallway casting a glow on his face. "Emma," he whispered, "you awake?" She nodded. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep," he said, stepping closer. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" She shifted in bed and nodded again. He sat on the edge of the mattress, leaving space between them. His hands clasped between his knees. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then he looked at her, his voice low. "I had a dream. About you. About us." Emma's breath caught. She tried to keep her expression still, but her heart was beating too fast. "In the dream, we weren't step anything," he said. "We were just two people, living together, laughing. Like it was natural." Emma stayed quiet, but her hands curled into the blanket. "I know this is weird," Liam said quickly, "and I'm not trying to make things uncomfortable. But I've been holding this in for a long time. I needed to tell you." She finally looked at him, unsure what to say. His eyes were gentle but serious. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't confused. "I feel something when I'm around you," he continued. "It's not just friendly or convenient. I think about you all the time. And I don't know if I should, but I do." Emma's throat tightened. She'd imagined this conversation so many times, what she would say, how she'd react. Now that it was happening, her words were lost. "You don't have to say anything," Liam added. I couldn't keep pretending anymore." He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. Their hands touched gently, like they were both afraid it might be too much. His fingers were warm, and the way he held her hand wasn't romantic in the usual way. It was careful, respectful, honest. Then, just as quickly, a voice echoed from down the hallway, "Emma, you still up?" It was her mom's voice. They froze. Liam let go of her hand and stood up. "I should go," he said, his voice soft. Emma didn't stop him. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't find the right words in time. He opened the door and left. Without looking back, the room felt colder after he was gone. Emma sank into her pillow, staring at the ceiling again. But everything was different now. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was full of unspoken things, feelings, questions. And a new truth between them. He had come to her in the quiet of night, not to cross a line, but to be honest. And now she had to face the part of her that didn't want to push him away. Emma closed her eyes and held the blanket tighter. Sleep wouldn't come. Not tonight, not after that. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling like the world had shifted, but everything around her looked the same. The trees outside were still turning gold. The kitchen still smelled like coffee. And the morning news played quietly from the living room. But inside her, something was different, like something had been opened that she didn't know how to close again. She avoided the hallway where Liam's room was. She wasn't ready to face him. Her thoughts were too tangled. She kept replaying the night before, the way he looked at her, the way he spoke so honestly, and the quiet way he held her hand. He hadn't asked for anything. He'd just told the truth. And that was what made it harder. All day she stayed busy. Cleaning, reading, scrolling her phone without really seeing anything. She needed time to think, but her mind wouldn't slow down. Was it wrong to feel something for him? Technically, they weren't related. They hadn't shared a childhood, hadn't grown up in the same house, but they lived under the same roof now. And they were supposed to be family, at least on paper. That evening, she finally saw him again. He was in the backyard, tossing a ball for the dog. His sleeves were pushed up, and his expression was unreadable, calm on the outside, but distant. He didn't look her way. She stood by the back door for a moment, watching. She wanted to go to him, say something, anything. But her feet didn't move. And then he turned toward the woods and walked off down the trail. Days passed like that. Slow, heavy, and quiet. Liam stopped showing up in the kitchen late at night. No more shared tea, no more conversations on the porch. It was like a switch had flipped. He wasn't cold, but he wasn't warm either. Just polite, careful, distant. Emma hated it. She hadn't meant to hurt him. She just didn't know what to say that night. And now everything between them felt fragile. It's like it might break if she touched it. On the fourth day, she finally knocked on his door. There was no answer. She opened it slightly and peeked in. Empty. His room was clean. Bed made. Jacket gone. Downstairs, she found a note on the kitchen counter. Gone for a few days. Needed space. Liam, that was it. No explanation. No promise to come back. She stared at the note, heart sinking. She wanted to call him, but she didn't know what she'd say. Would he even want to hear from her? That night, the house felt colder. She curled up on the couch with a blanket and tried to distract herself with TV, but nothing helped. Her mind kept drifting back to the way he'd looked at her in the dark. Not desperate, not pushy, just real. He'd trusted her with his feelings. And she'd frozen. Now he was gone. She thought about all the small things. How he always waited to pour the last cup of coffee in case she wanted it. How he kept extra batteries in the drawer because he knew the remote died often. How he made her laugh without trying. How being around him made her feel safe, seen. He wasn't just someone living in the house. He had become part of her life, quietly, slowly, and then all at once. By midnight, Emma was pacing the kitchen. She kept looking at the door, half expecting him to walk in, say something sarcastic, and pretend nothing happened. But the door stayed shut. She looked at the note again, reading it over and over like the words might change. Needed space. Did that mean he was giving up? Or just waiting for her to figure things out? She thought about the moment he let go of her hand. How quickly he had stepped back when he heard her mom's voice. He had respected her space, even when he didn't want to. That mattered. She went upstairs and sat on his bed. His room still smelled like his cologne. Clean, simple, familiar. She noticed a small notebook on the desk, but didn't touch it. She wasn't ready to cross that line. Instead, she just sat there, surrounded by silence, wondering how someone could become such a big part of her life without her realizing it. And now he was gone. Emma wrapped her arms around her knees and closed her eyes. She hadn't cried, not yet. But the ache in her chest was growing harder to ignore. What scared her most wasn't losing him. It was the thought that maybe he'd already decided she didn't feel the same. That maybe he'd chosen to protect himself by walking away. But she did feel something. She'd just been too afraid to say it. Afraid of what people would think. Afraid of crossing a line. Afraid of what it meant for their family. But in the middle of all those fears was one quiet truth. Liam mattered to her in a way no one else had. And now, with him gone, she felt the weight of that truth more than ever. As the wind picked up again outside, rustling the last of the autumn leaves, Emma sat in the dark and made a quiet promise to herself. If he came back, she wouldn't stay silent. She would tell him everything. 3 days had passed and Liam still hadn't come home. Emma kept checking the driveway, hoping to see his old truck, but every time she looked, the space stayed empty. She told herself not to worry, that he just needed space, like he said. But the truth was, the silence was getting harder to take. She didn't hear from him. No texts, no calls, no updates, just the short note he left behind. And the longer he stayed gone, the more her mind filled in the blanks. Maybe he regretted telling her how he felt. Maybe he was embarrassed, or maybe he wasn't coming back. Each day without him felt heavier than the last. She tried to go about life as usual. She went to work, answered texts from her friends, smiled when her mom asked how she was doing. But behind the smile, she was holding back the storm inside her. Every corner of the house reminded her of him. The chipped mug he always used. The jacket he'd left hanging by the door, the blanket he always pulled over his legs when they watched movies. It was like he was still everywhere, except in the one place she wanted him there, beside her. That night, Emma sat in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. She sipped cold tea, staring at the clock. She couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to one thing. She never told Liam how she felt. She never said anything that night. And now he probably thought she didn't care. But she did. More than she had ever wanted to admit. The next morning, Emma found herself walking into his room again. It felt wrong at first, but something pulled her in. She needed to feel closer to him, even if he wasn't there. His desk was neat, his bed untouched. She sat on the edge, feeling the quiet around her. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined him walking through the door, teasing her like he used to, asking why she always stole the last piece of toast or why she left the light on in the hallway. But the silence didn't answer her. She looked down and noticed something she hadn't seen before. A photo, face down on the nightstand. She turned it over. It was a picture of the two of them from last winter, taken during a family trip. They were standing side by side, cheeks red from the cold, smiling like they had no idea the world could ever get complicated. That smile had been real. Emma felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She missed that version of them when everything was simple, before feelings got in the way. But maybe feelings didn't ruin things. Maybe hiding them did. She spent the day thinking about what she would say to him if she got the chance. It wouldn't be some big speech, just the truth. That she missed him. That she felt something too. That she wasn't scared anymore by the third night. The house felt too empty to pretend anymore. She sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the stars. The air was cool, the trees whispering in the dark. Everything was calm on the outside, but inside. She was spinning. And then she heard it. The sound of tires on gravel. She shot up from her chair, heart racing. A moment later, headlights turned into the driveway. The old truck rolled to a stop. Emma froze, standing barefoot on the porch steps as he climbed out of the truck. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. His jacket was wrinkled, and he had a folded piece of paper in his hand. Neither of them spoke at first. Then he walked toward her slowly, eyes locked on hers. "I didn't know if I should come back," he said. His voice quiet. "I'm glad you did," she replied, trying not to let her emotions take over. He held out the paper. "I wrote this. On the second night. I wasn't sure if I'd give it to you, but it helped me figure things out." Emma took the letter but didn't open it yet. She looked at him, and something inside her finally settled. "You didn't ruin anything," she said softly. "I was just scared. Not of you, of how real it felt. And I didn't know what to do with that." Liam didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her like he was waiting for her to keep going. "I miss you," she said. "I've missed you every day you were gone." He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. "You're not just family to me, Emma. You're the person I want to talk to when everything feels wrong. The one I think about when I hear a song or see something funny. It's always been you." She felt the tears slip down her cheeks. But she didn't wipe them away. This moment, this finally was worth everything. Liam reached out but didn't touch her. He just stood there waiting. Emma closed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't about passion. It was about comfort, about feeling whole again. He held her like she mattered. Like she wasn't just someone he lived with, but someone he chose. They stayed like that for a while. Wrapped in quiet understanding. Later, they sat on the porch together, her head resting on his shoulder as the stars blinked overhead. They didn't need to rush anything. Whatever came next would come when it was right. But for now, he was home, and so was she. The next morning came slowly. Emma woke up early, not because of an alarm, but because her heart was finally at peace. For the first time in days, her chest didn't feel tight. She got dressed and made coffee like usual, but everything felt different now. Lighter. She kept thinking about last night, about the way Liam had looked at her, and how safe it felt to finally be honest with each other. She hadn't opened his letter yet. It still sat on the kitchen table, folded neatly like it was waiting for the right moment. She poured a cup of coffee, sat down, took a deep breath before carefully opening it. Liam's handwriting was rough but familiar. She read slowly. Emma, I didn't leave to run away. I left because I needed to know if what I was feeling was real or just a passing thing. Turns out, the longer I stayed away from you, the more I missed you. Not just being around you, but being near the version of myself that only exists when I'm with you. I'm not confused. I'm sure now I care about you, more than I've ever cared about anyone. There was a pause in her chest, and then she kept reading. If you don't feel the same, I'll respect that. I'll never make things uncomfortable. But if there's even a small part of you that sees me the way I see you, then I hope you'll let me in. No pressure. No rush. Just honesty. The letter ended with his name, simple and quiet. Emma folded it carefully and held it to her chest. She didn't need time to think anymore. She already knew. Liam came downstairs not long after, his hair still damp from a shower, wearing a soft gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked more relaxed. But there was still something careful in his eyes, like he wasn't sure where they stood yet. Emma stood from her chair and walked over to him, holding the letter in her hand. I read it, she said gently. He waited. I felt everything you did. I just didn't know how to say it. His eyes softened. You don't have to explain, she smiled. I want to. They sat together at the table just like they used to. No pressure, no expectations. Just a people who had finally stopped hiding from the truth. Over the next few days, things between them grew slowly, naturally. There were no dramatic declarations or rushing into anything. They just spent time together. Morning coffee turned into long conversations. Walks around the property became their quiet escape. Liam would sit next to her on the couch, their shoulders touching slightly. And it was enough. One night they drove to a nearby lake just before sunset. It was quiet, the water still, the sky painted with soft orange and pink. Emma leaned back against the hood of the truck, and Liam stood beside her. I used to think love was supposed to be loud, she said. Big gestures, crazy emotions. But this, whatever this is, it feels real. Liam looked out at the water. Sometimes the quiet things last longer. She nodded. I'm not scared anymore. He turned to her. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. He reached for her hand, and this time it wasn't uncertain. It was steady. They stayed there, holding hands, watching the sky darken as stars began to appear. Back at home, they kept things private. They weren't rushing to explain their feelings to anyone else. Their parents didn't need to know every detail. Not yet. What mattered most was that they understood each other. And for now, that was enough. One weekend, Emma's mom mentioned how nice it was to see them getting along again. You two always had a strange kind of connection, she said with a smile. It's like you read each other's minds. Emma smiled politely, glancing at Liam across the table. Maybe we just understand each other. After dinner, they went for a walk through the woods behind the house. Leaves crunched under their feet, and a cool breeze drifted through the trees. Do you think this will ever get complicated again? Emma asked. Liam looked at her. Maybe. Life always finds a way to challenge people. But whatever happens, I'd rather face it with you than without you. She looked up at him, her heart full. Me too. They reached the old wooden bench near the stream and sat down. For a while, neither of them said anything. The sound of water and wind filled the silence. Then Liam spoke again. I want to build something real with you, Emma. I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but I know it starts with honesty and patience. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And trust. He nodded. Exactly. As autumn gave way to winter, their bond grew stronger. What began as confusion turned into clarity. What once felt impossible now felt like the most natural thing in the world. They were no longer dancing around what they felt. They were building something steady, something gentle, something worth protecting. There were still challenges ahead, conversations to be had, but they weren't afraid anymore. They had each other.